Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I'm your host, Brian Scott. It's a fantastic day to read the words of Quo, and I have a very recent channeling. This one delivered on January 24th, 2024, dealing with the relationship between negative polarity and the shadow self. Quo is a group of higher density beings channeled by LL Research that answer questions of a spiritual nature. They are made up of Ra, Latui, and Haton, Ra being the original channeler for the law of one material. These channelings are taking the law of one to the next step and evaluating them on a regular basis with a variety of topics. We've learned so much. Our question today has to do with how the service to others polarity relates to the service to self polarity. The Confederation speaks about the shadow in terms similar to Carl Jung, where we project our own shadow self outwards onto others. Many of the aspects of the shadow seem to deal with others who inflict pain and suffering. But our understanding is this behavior typically comes from a place of confusion and pain, rather than active negative polarity, which gives us an opportunity to work on acceptance and non-judgment of our shadows. It seems like there is something more essential about the relationship of the negative polarity and the positive, as the positive polarity wasn't effective until the negative polarity became possible. So what role does the actual negative polarity play in the shadow of the positive polarity? Jim channeling. I am Quo, and greet each of you at this time in the love and in the light of the one infinite creator of all things. We are honored to be called to your circle of seeking, for it has been some of what you call time since we have been able to hear your call and answer it. We are those who walk this path seeking the one creator within all things, as do you. And today, we feel that you have asked a question. It is like a jewel with many facets. And we will do our very best to give you our response in a way that may aid your spiritual journey and also clarify that journey for those who would also like to know more about their own journeys. We would also ask you that you consider us as your brothers and sisters who move along the same path as do you, even though we are a step or two ahead. We do not wish to give anyone the impression that what we say is infallible, authoritative, or the only truth that can be spoken. So we ask that any who hears or reads these words to take them with your proverbial grain of salt. Think about them in a way that applies them if they are applicable and leaves them to the side if they are not helpful in your own spiritual journey. Today you have asked about the seeker of truth that has knowledge of its shadow side, as it is called, that shadow that has been accumulated over the period of the lifetime to the present date, and walks with you as truly as that reflection of light that has found a barrier of kinds through which it cannot move, and provides what the physical eye would see as a kind of shadow upon the ground, but which the inner eye, the spiritual eye, the mental eye, the emotional eye, sees as information which has not been properly, shall we say, understood or processed or utilized, and had to be put aside for the time being. And as time proceeds in the spiritual seeker's journey, this shadow has an effect that may at times be disturbing or unnerving, as it manifests in one's own life pattern in a manner which is concerning, confusing, and that which does not aid the spiritual path of seeing all as the one creator to be served with love and light. This shadow side then has a kind of power that comes to the facet in one's being that can block certain perceptions and manifestations of one's own desire to positively polarize on the spiritual path. This shadow side then, if it can be recognized and utilized in a useful way, in number one, having its existence mentioned, experienced, realized to the seeker by the seeker, then that power which it has to confuse, that power which it has to distort, that power which it has to cause difficulty in the spiritual seeking may be utilized in a positive sense, so that that power accelerates one's knowledge of oneself and sees those facets of one's being that have accumulated through the years of living the life of the seeker, and previous to become a conscious seeker, utilized in a fashion which gives more knowledge to the conscious seeker of truth, of those portions of itself which may now be mined as a kind of gold or jewel that can magnify the journey of the seeker. The utilization of the shadow side, then, is a reunification of the totality of the beingness of the seeker of truth. Each seeker of truth then can do this. This is part of your spiritual path. This is what you have come to do, to unify all the portions of the one Creator that exist within you and without you, within your own beingness as you move forward in your spiritual journey of seeking. Thus, this is a great boon to the spiritual seeker of truth, for it is that which begins more and more fully to put together the puzzle pieces, shall we say, of one's being, of one's journey, of the very essence of the one infinite Creator that exists in all entities and all things at all times. We are aware that now there is the necessity for relating the shadow side to the negatively oriented entities that have their own shadow as a means of projecting themselves in the one infinite creation as those who have the authority to separate and control others, separate others from themselves and control them. And for this beginning of the answering of your question, we will transfer this contact to the one known as Austin. We are those of Quo, Austin channeling. We are Quo, and we are now with this instrument. At this time, we would offer a disclaimer or a caution to the seeker who is contemplating how to relate to the negative polarity as one who identifies with the positive polarity within your third density illusion, as has been referenced in your query for this session. It is very common within your illusion that pain and difficulty and trauma, all those things that serve as the catalyst for growth and self-reflection, are caused by other human behavior, your other selves who are attempting as you to find bearing within an illusion in which the veil of forgetting has caused immense confusion and a lack of natural apprehension of your own nature and the nature of those about you. Because of this limited perception, we caution the seeker against attempting to view a particular individual as being purely of the negative polarity. For while it is not necessarily impossible that you, as a positive seeker, would come into direct contact or direct interaction with such an individual, it is quite a nearly impossible thing to judge and to discern from your veiled state the true polarity of another individual, because to discern the polarity of an individual would require a knowledge and an awareness of that individual's intentions and their own self-conceptualization. You would have to be sure that this individual is acting from a place of conscious co-creation in their activities and how they relate to others, that whatever action or activity has caused you to question their polarity would come not from a place of pain or confusion, but from a place of cold wisdom and pure love of self. We find that it is much more common that you, as seekers within the third density, particularly upon your planetary sphere, come into contact with the effects and the systems influenced by such individuals. But such individuals themselves are relatively rare. And what you might judge as being of service to self is indeed an artifact of those activities, and not the activities themselves, that being the confusion and the pain instigated within your illusion that the negative polarity attempts to stir up or create in order to utilize and to take advantage of this lack of cohesion and lack of apprehension of the light of the Creator. This is an important aspect of your response to this query, or in attempting to grapple with the aspect of your shadow that is truly represented by the opposite polarity. You must typically do such work in the abstract and in understanding and attempting to comprehend how this polarity works. And you may witness some things that reflect this nature about you, but attempting to apply this label directly is typically ill-advised. Your question centers around this aspect of the shadow of the positive polarity and what the service to self polarity contains that relates to the shadow. In order to explore this dynamic, we can turn to the very fundamental aspect of creation, as you might perceive it, in that in order for there to be a reality at all for you to experience as an aspect of the Creator, there must be some form of dynamic tension. You can observe this fundamental law alive within the laws of your physics, as your scientists comprehend it, that the very nature of your material reality is based upon various movers and moved, various tensions between two poles, forces at play that pull upon objects, that create this dynamic between subject and object in order for the material of your illusion to even come alive. This is also true of your metaphysical reality, where, in order for there to be a system of illusion that allows for the creator to experience itself, there must be some kind of dynamic tension, a subject and an object, two poles along a polarity in which tension can be created. A relationship can be formed. This manifests in many different ways, but has its origin within the very beginnings of your octave, as the harvest of the previous octave, the polarity of the mover and the moved. You can reflect upon this harvest of the previous octave and witness how it might be alive in almost all relationships, and how your consciousness is able to even move and have an experience within your illusion. And it is within this environment of tension and dynamic that the nature of the polarity of your third density becomes relevant. As you pointed out within your query, the positive polarity lacked a certain ability to create momentum and generate the type of metaphysical gravity and inertia that allowed for the experience of the creator to manifest in a meaningful way prior to the veil of forgetting, that allowed for the manifestation of the service to self polarity once this veil of forgetting was instigated and implemented. The dynamic of service to others became much more potent because the dynamic of service to self became a realized reality, in that entities were able to view the self as individual, as separate. And with that view, they were able to relate to the creation in a new and unique way. Those upon the positive path also were blessed with this view of the individual self, and thus were able to relate to the creation in their own unique individual way. And this is where what we have called the choice was born, because the seeker, the mind-body-spirit complex alive within the third density, was able to view the self, as an individual, as an agent within a creation that was other than the self. This mind-body-spirit complex could then make a true choice of true free will of how to relate to the creation about them. This was not possible in an essential sense prior to this veiling, for the relationship to the creation about one flowed so naturally that the knowledge of self as creator and the oneness of self with creation, that it was inconceivable, for the most part, that one could have a relationship with the creation in which one could relate in a way that saw the self as separate and saw the self as having one's own right and ability to relate from one's own sovereign crown and throne as a creator. It is with the advent of this possibility that the confusion of third density became relevant to both polarities. In your question, you have pointed out that this very valuable resource that we have called the shadow, and that you have called the shadow, becomes available to the third density entity through the manifestation of the actions of others, and how they may create pain and behave in ways that one does not approve of, that one prefers not to view as a behavior that the self is capable of, that one prefers not to acknowledge exists within the self as an entity who desires to share love and to create a positive and comfortable and joyous creation. It becomes difficult to view activities of others which are counter to this desire. But the gift of the shadow, as we have spoken, comes from the ability to choose for the self how one wishes to relate to the creation, while still acknowledging and accepting that the self contains all things, and that you are the creator in all of its manifestations, that no matter what you view, no matter what activity is before you, what aspect of the creation you witness, you contain that aspect within you as the creator. There is nothing that you can view or experience or witness another experience that you yourself are not capable of experiencing and of performing or acting upon the creation. The nature of the choice in polarity is that you, as the mind-body-spirit complex, attempting to gather experience for the creator, reduce your experience upon one of these pathways, and so it is natural that you attempt to act according to your desire and according to your choice. But it is the nature of the positive polarity that love is shared universally and unconditionally. And so when you are challenged by something that you witness. Though you may not conceive of yourself as behaving in such a way, or creating such conditions, it is an intentional challenge or catalyst generated by that experience that causes you to exercise your muscle of love, of unconditional forgiveness and acceptance, and understanding that this too is the Creator. This too contains the love of the Creator. This is an aspect of your very being. The very depths of your being contains that which you are having difficulty witnessing and integrating. We have described how this dynamic allows for the self upon the path of service to others to come to a deeper relationship with their very being as the Creator. And it is through this process that you come closer and closer to a relationship with the pure service to self polarity in the process of grappling with the behaviors and activities and circumstances about you, coming to a conscious process of utilizing the catalyst in order to open your heart and discover yourself as the Creator in a deeper and deeper sense. You come closer and closer to a crystallized expression of service to others. And this crystallized expression of service to others allows you to discern with greater clarity a crystallized understanding of the service to self polarity. This is an extremely advanced and difficult course of experience within the third density, which is not necessarily an intended path for each seeker within the third density to walk. For it is adequate within the third density to come to a modicum of an open heart that is instigated by simply processing the catalyst of pain and confusion. But for the adept who wishes to step even further, they will come into contact with a deeper understanding of the actual mechanics of service to self and how those activities may manifest. This is a perception of wisdom and becomes a much longer process for the adept than the initial utilization of catalyst of pain and confusion to begin to conceive of a pure crystallized expression of the Creator that does not cause pain and confusion out of one's own pain and confusion, but rather has discovered those aspects of the creation and of reality and has found joy within them and has found personal purpose within them, and then attempts to consciously and purposefully utilize them for their own gain and their own power. This creates a greater challenge for the entity upon the path of service to others, for it is even more difficult for the positive seeker to conceive of the Creator, of an aspect of the Creator having a conscious awareness of the self and of other self as the Creator, and yet still inflicting such circumstances upon another self in an attempt to control simply for the reason that this negative seeker has found purpose within this way of relating to the creation. It is a great challenge to come to an understanding of this and an acceptance of this. We find that it is very common for the positive seeker who is able to offer forgiveness and acceptance and love upon the grounds of other selves manifesting their pain and confusion in ways that affect others, simply needing to be healed. And if that healing takes place, they would cease that behavior. But for the other self who acts without this wounding and does so intentionally is a much tougher pill to swallow, you might say. And it is in this challenge that the true gift of the negative polarity and its manifestation as a shadow of the positive polarity is offered. It is a higher hurdle, a heavier weight to lift, and allows the seeker of the positive polarity to have an even greater contrast of their own conscious choice in how to relate to the creation, so that they come to a deeper and deeper understanding of the self that does not rely upon the notion that others act unconsciously when they cause harm and pain. We understand the difficulty of this, and we reiterate and emphasize that it is not expected of you as the seeker within the third density to discover within yourself a pure acceptance of all things that you encounter and all circumstances. The very intention of the density that you find yourself within is to provide these challenges. If you were not challenged, you would not need the experience of this density. The very purpose of your manifestation and incarnation within this specific experience relies upon the notion that you find it difficult, but that you rise to the challenge and attempt in any way to meet that difficulty with an open heart is admirable, beyond what you can conceive. From our point of view outside of the veil of third density, it is one of the most beautiful manifestations of the Creator that we can witness for the seeker in third density, to attempt, even in the face of failure, to continue opening the heart and to accept all things, to realize the self and all other selves and all of the creation as the one infinite creator is indeed the axis, the pure beauty of the creator itself. Our hearts are with you in this challenge, and we offer ourselves in whatever way we can as you attempt to discover this light within the darkness of the veil of third density. At this time, we will transfer the contact to the one known as Gary. We are Quo, Gary channeling. We are those of the principle of Quo, and once again, we continue our sharing of thoughts on this interesting subject, with the caveat and request as ever that our thoughts serve as points of embarkation for your own consideration and contemplation. For whatever our perspective, we cannot walk the path for any. Only you and the full subjectiveness of your awareness, can determine what is true and not true. For what use to make of information, we would not supplant your authority and the primacy of your inner process. The material which we examine today is relevant in one way or another for most spiritual paths upon your planet. That is to say, for those who have consciously taken up the answering of the call of the Creator to seek and to become one, to step outside of the unconscious and blind, repetitive patterns of the strictly yellow ray world in order to begin moving upward into the consideration and the exploration of what love is. Love as principle, love as a philosophy, love as a concept, love most particularly and poignantly as lived, as applied, as embodied. It is one thing to be on the other side in the classroom, studying the patterns of the universe, the ways of the incarnation, the possibilities that entities exercise in relating to one another, and see how it is all a projected manifestation of the one Creator, and to see that always the solution, so to speak, the balance lies in opening the heart to that primal frequency of love that begins to dissolve the illusions of separation. But within the incarnation, one does not enjoy that broadness of view or depth of awareness that one has so easily on the other side. In the incarnation, you are in the thick of it. The stakes are high, the consequence is great, the meaning amplifying to its maximum. Whether it be the physical life and death of the self, the integrity or structure or functioning of the mind of the energetic self, the things which one seeks to accomplish or to protect, or for other outcomes the self seeks to avoid or to pursue. The total being within the incarnation is committed to the play and has, in most cases, become the play. There is a lack of awareness of the curtains, much less that which spreads outward into foreverness behind the curtains. An endless confusion results, endless misunderstanding and misapprehension, not as a single act, but as an act that cascades, one misunderstanding begetting another misunderstanding, begetting another misunderstanding within the self, between selves, between groups. As it rolls forward and creates an ambiance or environment within which the self operates, of misunderstanding itself, assumptions are made about the nature of reality that become threads of programming for individuals and societies that sink down into the roots and become the mythos or mythological substrata of the functioning of that society, such that it becomes the invisible walls of reality that restrict and point perception into a certain pre-given container, creating yet more wonderful opportunity for misunderstanding to pile on top of, or distort further the deeper foundational misunderstandings. Pain and suffering are inevitable in this environment as we have described it, for the self misunderstands most fundamentally its own self, and develops a disharmony within the self and relates to others unknowingly, inadvertently in the disharmony, relating to the disharmony within the other self, indeed 2 selves, 3, 4, and more orbiting and dancing around in a way in which love is not central, but the entanglements and the machinations of the imbalanced and blocked lower rays, which are themselves a manifestation of this environment of misunderstanding. And in this disharmonious relationship, are relationships imbalanced in dynamics of power, love, and wisdom. There's the perennial puzzle of the third density illusory experience of understanding. Whose distortions are whose? This question is evident in most seekers' lives, in particularly and especially those that are of an intimate nature where 2 selves operate so closely together, as in your marriage, that each provides triggering catalyst, one to the other precipitating reaction, narrative, and perception that it becomes a challenge to untangle who is doing what to whom, whose responsibility it is that one or the other or both or more are in pain or suffering or displeased or unhappy, and the projection in this circumstance can run wild and freely. The self, as the biblical saying goes, but which is not coming readily to this instrument's mind, but perhaps may be added subsequently, blames the other self to that which is being generated within self. This points to an aspect of the working of this dynamic which you have called projection in your group question, whereby the self is ascribing their own internally and self-generated reality as happening or being sourced outside of the self. It is not the self which is responsible for the reality in this condition of projection, but rather the other self. Examining this particular dynamic, we see that there is a lack of conscious acknowledgement, much less acceptance, of the true source of the self's catalyst. Thus the self is caught in the hall of mirrors, thinking it is looking upon other faces, and not recognizing that it is, in its blocked and imbalanced energetic system, seeing its own face, or we should say, seeing places where it is blocking and misunderstanding and imbalancing the love and the light of the one Creator, operating not from the green and blue rays which may see the other selves more clearly as they are, but is instead operating out of a blockage or a set or complex of blockages or imbalances. This connects to why we of the Confederation have described other selves as your mirrors. This is quite literally the case that your relationships reflect back to you the fruit of your own beingness, the quality and state of your work or non-work in consciousness, that which you do not acknowledge or accept within yourself, which is not to say that all work is completely internal, for two or more selves in relationship are exercising free will in one way or another, having impact upon other selves, contributing to individual and group outcomes in the work of clear communication and the finding of the love within the moment, whether that is expressed as compassion or empathy or forgiveness or understanding, is worthwhile and called for. This projection of things unconscious, of things unaccepted within the self, creates not just a division or even fragmentation within the complex of the variety of constituent, unintegrated components of the self, but within the societal mind, the collective or group mind as well. The collective exerts a shadow and projection, whether that is seen in groups relating to groups or in the internal workings of any given group. There are mass psychic, geographical areas, you may say, of aspects of the societal body that have gone untended to unacknowledged. One can see this in the way that nation-states relate to one another, complete, and find intolerance and even bellicosity between them. Those of the negative polarity may seek exactly these qualities within the shadow, these qualities which are projected and unintegrated. There is a psychic field and gravity there in that shadow, fed by pain and those energies that start as love, but are the fruit or the result of love distorted, be they jealousy, envy, possessiveness, dominance, or its partner powerlessness, hatred, enmity, and so forth. These energies, not brought into the heart, can take upon a psychic life of their own in the health of the group and create myriad opportunities for not only further confusion, but the use and embodiment of such energies by the clever and willful friends of the negative polarity, those who not only live within the shadow and the projected images, but seek to make use of this material that it may exploit others for the gain of the self. One might see the path of the negative polarity as the shadow come alive, as the shadow intelligently organized and controlled, shaped from chaos or randomness or flux and instability into a disciplined, coherent tool and purpose. The negative polarity has a relationship with its own shadow, first and foremost, and seeks opposite of the positive polarity's attempt to love and accept and bring all things into the heart, to exclude it, and all aspects of the creation from the heart of the self, to close down the full operation of the heart, that these energies may be controlled by the negative polarity, that it may be untroubled by which those of the positive polarity may call the conscience, the empathy that would otherwise interfere with and preclude the harmful exploitative treatment of others. This shadow within which the negative polarity operates is described as such also because it is not a realm of transparency. The entity pursuing the negative arts seeks to cloak, obscure, and represent their true intention as best as possible. They wish not to be known by the other self except insofar as they wish to be known as the entity on top of the power pile. They to whom fealty is owed. They who may exercise in their wildest dreams unlimited and total power over the free will of other selves. From the perspective of the positive polarity, this offers a potent and wide-ranging field of reflection, for upon a shared planetary sphere, the negative polarity arises out of the shadow of that planetary group. So in the ways of the negative polarity, or in the ways of those presumed to be pursuing the dark path of separation, the positive polarity has abundant material to see its own self, not just the individual self, but the group self. In a world such as yours, there are great and many shadows afoot, as yours are a people which have not, as we have said, made efficient use of their catalysts, which is to say, have remained largely unconscious and unself-reflective. Thus, there is much which is unprocessed, which is repressed or cast out of the awareness, and which sinks down into the deeper layers and is carried forward from generation to generation in the massed mind. And as we had spoken previously in this circle, it is indeed one of the most challenging, if not utterly agonizing aspects of third density life for the soul who seeks to operate within an open heart, sensitive to suffering, to see the workings of those who would embrace, embody, and exploit the shadow. This instrument recently has been confounded by the notion of sadism, as he has been reading of the caste system endemic and traveling back to the roots of your own country in the system of American slavery, and in reading and attempting to see from the perspective of those who suffered at the hands of those you call the Nazis. What this instrument has found greatly troubling and difficult to understand is the willful brutality that those of your planet are capable of inflicting upon other innocents, shall we say. Not just capable, but of the seeming pleasure that the people derive from hurting others, whether they be in pain and unconscious, or whether they be of the negative polarity, that polarity that began in pain but developed that pain into intentional weapons, how such could even be possible, much less pursued. Despite his breadth of philosophical study and the scope of conceptualization of a universe that can adequately make room for a shadow and a negative polarity, still, there is great cognitive and emotional difficulty in coming to terms with harm of others when it is encountered. And we find this is true for nearly all positively oriented seekers, and thus is one of the great virtues and problems, you might say, of the third density experience. This attempt to come to terms, to not judge that which one finds abhorrent or not understandable, but to expand the identity outward to, you might see it as, be more like the Creator in accepting the unacceptable and seeing those of the negative polarity, and presuming for the purpose of this hypothetical that they can be identified as such within an illusion where that is a problematic exercise, accepting these two as brothers, as sisters, as self, as not other than that you and they, vast though the difference may seem to be in your chosen behaviors, are of, and indeed are, the same one being. Ultimately, that what those of the negative polarity do with their consciousness is, as we have spoken previously, within the circumference of the self's own possibilities. It is impossible to look squarely and directly at the harm caused by the negative polarity, to look at those perpetuating such energies from within the shadow and see that the self too, under different circumstances, under the circumstances that the negative entity has walked, could also have pursued or made those decisions, not of course within the present subjective awareness within which the self operates, but that nexus which is your present moment has been arrived at as a result of walking a path that has included countless inputs and decisions. You of the positive polarity have used your catalyst to choose in a certain direction, a slight shift somewhere along the line deep in your past. As the choice was being formulated, could have produced a different trajectory. A few more ounces of suffering could also likewise have caused the travel in a different direction. One can also develop a compassion for those of the negative polarity, for that which in their quenchless thirst for more and more power and dominance, they sacrifice, that being the companionship, community, mutual support, joy, and song and dance that are inherent and innate to the positive polarity. The extreme isolation and imprisonment of the self into the false and separate self is one which is a viable path forward and which does bring with it great power, but is one which is miserable, you might say, whereas the suffering weighs heavy upon the heart and shoulders and minds of those of the positive polarity. There is ever the possibility of harmony within the self and within other selves, and indeed as much as you, the positive entity, may find chapters or periods or nightly recurrences of disharmony, you also know and seek and have enjoyed harmony and the expansion of being in the joy and the mirth of that harmony. This has become unavailable to your negative brethren, not as a result of cruel imposition of circumstance, but as a function of that which they have rejected and cast out of their heart. In a way, you could perceive those of this polarity to share a world where, in addition to the vast spectrum of suffering caused by sheer confusion and unconsciously projected pain, there are those who seek intentionally to inflict this pain, who gain pleasure from the inflicting of this pain, who serve behind the scenes, often sometimes in front, promulgating thought which perpetuates this condition. It is inherently painful, and while your philosophy may give you perspective and open the opportunity for some measure of peace and understanding, the pain is unlikely to go away. But that pain is informative and supported by your philosophy and your study. You can make use of this, not to blindly and reactively go to war with this shadow or those of the negative polarity in order to rid this scourge from your planet, but to engage in those studies, as we have spoken of here, primarily the study of self, which is far, far more than your conscious identity and personality shell within which you operate at this present moment, but is the all-self, which includes those of the negative polarity who give reflection back to the positive entity of its own shadow individually and collectively. At this time, we transfer our contact to the one known as Jim. We are those known to you as Quo. Jim channeling. I am Quo, and once again with this instrument. We would thank each instrument at this time for giving a dedicated period of their experience in this illusion to sharing more of the philosophy of that of the unity of all things, all people, and all paths of seeking to the one infinite creator. We have been honored this afternoon to be able to share with you the concepts that each has within the shadow, the negative thoughts, the confusions, the joy, the beauty, the purity of the one infinite creator that is all things, that 360-degree being that each carries within each. And we would thank you all once again today for calling for our presence and for our words and thoughts. We share them with you as the best that we have to give, and we are honored to share them. We walk with you on this path, but at this time we seemingly leave you in the love and the light of the one infinite creator. We are known to you as those of Quo. Adonai Vasu Boragas. This is certainly a very interesting lecture on a very subtle point. The discussion of the shadow side is introduced as unprocessed or misunderstood aspects of yourself that can impede positive polarization. Recognizing and utilizing these shadow aspects is presented as a pathway to deeper self-knowledge and spiritual growth. This process, according to Quo, involves acknowledging the existence of the shadow, understanding its impact, and integrating it into your being to promote unity and progress. They shift to an interaction with negative polarity entities, cautioning against oversimplification of that label. Sometimes you see people on TV and say, that's somebody that's negative polarity or service to self. It's difficult to discern the true intention of others. And so there is a warning that's here that you really don't know if they're negative or not. Maybe they have good intentions, they're just acting inappropriately. So they're explaining that it was the introduction of the veil of forgetting which made the distinction between these polarities more pronounced, enabling beings to perceive themselves as separate entities and make conscious choices about their spiritual orientation. The concept of the shadow of positive polarity related to service to self path is discussed as a necessary counterpart to the positive path. It's the design of third density. We have the sun and the moon, darkness and light. Everything is duality, and that's why we have the shadow. It guides us. This lecture highlights the essential unity and interconnectedness of all things. We're one with all the negative within our spiritual journey. It emphasizes a sort of self-awareness and acceptance and integration of the negative as being a part of you. The evolution of positive polarity illustrates a very sophisticated understanding of the spiritual dynamics of the universe. And that's why I love Quo so much, because it's next level. It's a very advanced teaching. The emphasis on the shadow side and the integration of aspects of the self challenges the dualistic perception of good versus evil, presenting a model of unity where all experiences contribute to the wholeness and evolution of your soul. So understand, when you see somebody out there that's acting negatively, you're seeing a version of yourself. So accepting that this is a part of yourself is part of this process. On another level, there's levels of negative. There's the people that are caught up unconsciously acting out their shadow, and there's people that are beyond that are truly evil, that intend evil things to happen, that are not acting unconsciously. They're consciously acting with intention, and there is a difference in that. And oftentimes the people that are acting negatively with intention are behind the scenes. We really don't even know who these people are. That's why the Law of One was such an incredible framework for me, because it was more realistic and detailed, that there's versions of positive and versions of negative. There's degrees of both, and there is a dynamic interplay of light and dark within our path. And coming to this idea of a choice that we make within ourselves is important. I'm sending all my love to everyone here and imagining wonderful things to everybody that's listening on this glorious day. You can find all episodes of The Reality Revolution at therealityrevolution.com. And welcome to The Reality Revolution.